The Voice Teacher Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by the International Voice Teachers of Mix. Today, we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Marianne Kehler. She is actually the president of the International Voice Teachers of Mix. And let me just share with you a little bit about this incredible woman we have on our show today. She has trained professional voice users, singers, speakers from international locations around the world. Her students include musical theater professionals, pop recording artists, lead singers for rock and R&B bands, classical choral soloists, music educators, voice teachers, worship leaders, and singer-songwriters. She is also a college audition coach whose students are in top colleges and conservatories all over the country, and is co-author of a book on auditioning for college programs. She's a musical theater director with 65 shows to her credit, and she is the executive producer of the Broadway Training Intensive. She's located in Denver. Wait, I wanted the part about your book, the Jack Canfield one. She's a published author in a book about success with Jack Canfield and 20 other authors?
Yeah, it's a book by including Jack Canfield and 20 other authors, as you said, and it's called Success Mastery.
Marianne has done everything, and like every time that I hear a new thing, I was surprised the first 10 times. I'm like, oh, and she was a professional coder, and she worked with this and with this, and it's like now I'm like, okay, yeah, you could have been a zoologist at some point and just hiding it from us.
No.
So what got you into singing in the first place and into voice teaching?
Oh, gosh. Well, I started singing when I was a very young child and discovered that I had an affinity for that. And I grew up in a little farm town in Montana, and there was a choir in the school, and I got to sing in the choir and eventually got to do some other things and just loved it. And then when I was looking at career options, the only thing that really occurred to me, keep in mind, this is the early 1970s, and I'm in a little town, and I was just sort of not even misdirected, but undirected. The only career path I could see for myself was as a high school choir director. I didn't want to do that. I don't enjoy working with people who aren't motivated. And part of being a high school teacher is there's a lot of, and I'm like, oh, well, have a really nice life, go join the soccer team, do something different. But that's not what I enjoy doing. And I knew that about myself even then. So I went off and did some administrative things, and then had the good fortune to work for an engineering company where I learned how to be a technical writer. And that led me to a path of working for a government contractor. And that led me to discovering that I was actually kind of good at programming, and took a bunch of programming classes and learned that I was also good at systems analysis, and did that work for, I guess, about 10 years. And then was actually I was taking an evening programming course at a local university. The professor called me aside one evening after classes. I was headed out the door and said, one of the things I've noticed is that when the orchestra is practicing down the hall, there was an orchestra that practiced for part of our class session, and he said, you lean toward the orchestra. And tonight you were leaning so far that I thought you were going to fall out of your chair. And I didn't realize that I was doing that. I think I was 32 at that point, and decided that I would maybe explore that a little bit. And so on the morning of my 32nd birthday, I made a note on the calendar that if I was still feeling the same way about pursuing music as a career, that I would stop doing what I was doing, and I would enroll in school and become a college music major at the age of 32. And 6 months later, that's what happened. And I discovered early on, I was in a classical voice program, and I discovered fairly early on, I love classical music and I really enjoy classical singing, but I discovered a real love for musical theater and started directing shows probably before I knew enough to really be directing shows. and built a business out of that, and opened a performing arts academy for teens and children, and did a lot of work with just some amazing kids along the way, and got to know their parents very well. Some of their parents are still friends, which is really fun. And basically did some really wonderful things. One of the things I had the opportunity to do was actually to MD the children's chorus on the Denver performances for the national tour of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I got to do that twice. And that was really kind of my introduction to national tours and to the Broadway community. And I'm still in touch with some of those people, and it's been a great journey along the way. So I'm in a performing arts academy. I'm doing my thing. I have a staff of 9 teachers and 3 kind of adjunct faculty. And I got a phone call from one of my daughters who was in college, and she was in a wonderful summer program for people who were headed into professional theater. And she said, I just had the most amazing voice lesson of my entire life. And I just wanted to share it with you. This is something I think you should look into. She had a lesson with Lee McRae, who's in Australia, and she had a
Oh.
lesson with Mary Walkley, who's in Florida. And these are people, many of you will know their names. They're people who are wonderful, wonderful teachers. And they were teaching a form of mix that was referred to, mixed singing, that is referred to at that time as speech level singing. And I contacted a speech level singing teacher, flew out to California, had a bunch of lessons, and went, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. One of the things that in my own voice was very frustrating to me is that being a classically trained singer at that point in my life, I had been taught that women should only sing in their head voices. So I'd sing clear down to an A flat 3 in my head voice, and it sounded kind of hooty and weird, but it was there. But I really have always had a very big, what we would call a heavier resonance or a chest voice. I've always had that. And so I would sing in my classical voice or actually what happened was I discovered, when I discovered musical theater, I was doing what I thought was belting and now I know was probably pretty much yelling. And I could do that up to a D5, and then on an E flat 5, this is a familiar story to any voice teacher, on an E flat 5, I would flip into my classical head voice. So I sounded like 2 different singers, and it was one of the things I hear a lot of in my own studio now, and help people recover from. But it felt like the distance between those 2 voices was the size of New Jersey, and I had no idea how to transcend it. And so I was in a lesson with Seth Riggs, who was actually the creator of the speech level singing method. And he was able to get me to a mix fairly quickly. And I was able to work through that area and sound like myself. And it was such an eye opening thing for me. And I was so incredibly excited because I knew that not only could I help myself, I could help a bunch of students that I really hadn't known how to help. I wasn't training bad singers, I was training good singers, but they all had the same problem. They had the same problem I had.
Well, okay, so then how did you become the IVTOM president? I mean, that's another journey kind of stemming from where you were at that point.
At that point in time, there were 2 people who become very important to me who were also part of the speech level singing organization. Dean Kehler, who is the founder of International Voice Teachers of Mix, and Terry Stock, who was one of the founding board members and who's a dear friend. I was really interested in the science of the voice and why it works the way it works. It turned out that Dean Kehler was interested in the same thing, and had decided to start an organization for voice teachers that would focus on both the science and the art of singing and teaching. And and Dean invited me to be a part of that organization. I became involved in the organization and helped launch it. And I still remember the day the first website was launched, and Dean Kehler and Terry Stock and the website was launched. And I think I had this expectation that was like the sky would open and angels would sing or something. And I'm sitting here looking at my computer going, something really exciting should be happening. And well, the website is up, but that's very exciting. So anyway, I've always been a person who has a lot of ideas. And one of the things that a theater director has to have is a lot of vision. And I think along the way, I just kept sharing visions of what I felt voice teachers needed, and what IVTOM could become.
What was your vision at the time, and how does it compare to
Oh,
what IVTOM is
wow.
now?
Well, pandemic has changed so many things about what IVTOM is now. My original vision was that there
Mhm.
would be a group of well-trained teachers and mentors who would be able to travel the world and share what they knew. And at that point in time, that worked. And then pandemic happened, and we're changing the way we do things. These podcasts are happening, which is absolutely fabulous. Thanks to both of you. I think we'll see a lot of changes. I think it gives us an opportunity to reach more people, which is terrific. I'd like to see us, now that the pandemic is beginning to wind down, I'd like to see us return to small trainings that are held around the world, so that small groups of teachers can gather together with a mentor teacher and share with that mentor teacher, and be taught, and also share with each other. I learned so much from watching other teachers. I learn how to do things, and just as importantly, I learn how not to do things. I'll watch another teacher and go, that works really well for them, but that's not my personality type. I need to approach this in a different way. But one of the things we do in the organization is make it affordable as well. There are members all over the world who are living almost at the poverty level, and they do not have the funds available to pay for training in US dollars. And so one of the things that we do is, for example, if we offer a masterclass for 100 US dollars, the members who are international pay 100 of their own currency. So that could translate to the fact that they might be paying $75 US for what some of us are paying 100 for. They might be paying $50 US. They might be paying $2 US if the value of their currency is highly underrated compared to the US dollar. I think it's a wonderful thing that we're doing. It is so important for teachers to have opportunities to learn that are, number one, based in science, number two, taught by people with many years of experience, and number three, to have opportunities for socialization, and to have opportunities to reach out to other teachers who perhaps know more about another subject. If I'm working with a blues singer, that's not my specialty. I can definitely coach technique. I have to sit down and really study style. And there may be a point where I start thinking about all the IVTOM teachers I know who out there knows more about blues, singing R&B or singing blues than I know. And I'm able to refer them to the singer to someone who knows more than I know in that area. And I love the fact that I can trust the training those people have had, the training those teachers have had, and be able to refer to someone who's going to do a great job for the student I'm passing on to them.
Let's move on and talk about your musical theater coaching. I think this is something, I mean, maybe Sam and I are particularly interested in this because we both love musical theater, but I think there are a lot of teachers that specialize in musical theater because it's so, I think for a lot of students, that's kind of the only option if you're not going to do choir, and they're young. And so that's where they can sing, is in their school musical. But, there are definitely a chunk of them that want to take it to the next level and really develop their skills at the college level and hopefully beyond. So tell us about your work with that, about, unified auditions and prepping students for that. What kinds of special skills do you really have to make sure that they walk out of your studio with to have successful auditions?
So the things that I look for in college auditions, first of all, are passion. I look for work ethic. I look for intelligence, because being an actor is incredibly hard work. And I look for talent. That last item said, I have seen people with a modicum of talent go on and do very big things because they had so much passion and such great work ethic. So along the way, we work to develop them as stronger performers. They get organizational skills. If they don't already know how to create a spreadsheet, they learn how, because that's the best way to keep track of all of the requirements for auditioning for college programs. And they learn how to dress for auditions, and they learn how to be interviewed, and how to interview a school. Because one of the things that I really focus on is, is in order to prevent the nerves that come from, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to get in anywhere, is this is a two-way street. You are interviewing the school as much as they are interviewing you. And you want to be sure you end up in the right place. And the way to do that is to ask some fairly specific questions about the school, about the program, to find out if it's the right place for you.
I have a question. Going back to your comment on talent, in my mind, talent is something you earn, and a gift is something you are like kind of blessed with from the get-go. You know what I mean? Like you could be gifted with great anatomy that lines up and just is really conducive to great singing, whereas some people are not blessed with that kind of anatomy, but yet they can work really hard and learn to manage their instrument and sing quite well, but still may not ever reach the level of that gifted person. Would you agree? Or do you feel like talent and gifted are the same thing? What do you mean when you refer to talent?
There are people who are truly gifted singers. They came out of the womb that way.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
Sometimes at the grocery store, I'll hear a 3-year-old singing and go, oh my gosh, listen to that. I think that those voices are very special. And you're right, those are the people who have that stellar quality. Can someone who doesn't have that quality work hard enough and be trained hard enough to match that? I don't know the answer to that. I think that you have to have a good instrument to start with. And then perhaps what you do with that instrument will have an impact on where you are. But if it wasn't a good voice to start with, are you ever going to achieve a stellar sound? I don't know.
I think sometimes, because there is definitely just you might win the genetic lottery and be able to make really loud sounds or really high sounds or whatever it is that culture likes at that point. But there's also people who may have the same sort of passion about something and the same sort of predisposition to try to go into something and interest, who just might grow up not with professional singers as parents and being modeled totally different things. And then maybe the 3-year-old just lucked into knowing how to sing a few things really, really well. And then they start getting all of that affirmation through their life. And then by the time they're 16, the gap is pretty big between someone who might have had that early head start and someone who has to catch up. And I've noticed that with a lot of people who are more I'm really into this, I really care about this, I have some really terrible habits because I just lucked into them. Those are a little bit harder to actually get up to a good technical ability than the people who just have never sung in their life. And then they're like, oh, I think I might like this. And then they're 19 and they're suddenly just professional opera singers because a year ago they were blank canvases and then they finally got the good skills. So it is a really interesting question, but I think that we can't really rule out how systemic all of this is, that it's you might luck into some situation that lets you get all of this. Is that a gift? Is that talent, that your parents are that good, or that you were in ballet lessons since you were 3? It's a really interesting thought.
Well, and I do remember reading, I wonder, it might have been in the talent code. They were talking about the 10,000 hour rule, for mastery. And it was interesting because it said, and it's been a while since I've read this, so forgive me if I misquote, but, people with they were looking at people studying at the university level, and people in the 4,000 to 5,000 hour range often didn't go on to become professional performers, but they became teachers. The people in the 5,000 to 7,000 hour range did more. And the people who were at the 10,000 hours they found that by the time they got to that, anybody who had put in 10,000 hours, there were no grinds. So they call them people who just didn't make progress, people who just weren't good by that point. The people who really put in those 10,000 hours were, exceptional kind of no matter where they started or whatever. Unlike, people who had less than the 4,000 or 5,000 hours, often they gave up or they just did not make as much progress. So, is it an amount of time that you put in, or is it, exposure? Maybe those people that lucked out when they were and born with all the right circumstances, they automatically have hours built in from a very young age. I mean, I wonder. I just think it's kind of interesting to
Agreed.
think of.
I think the 10,000 hour mark in anything is relevant. I've talked before about the fact that there was a point, I don't remember how many years ago it was, when I realized that I had become pretty good as a voice teacher. And the thing that led to that realization was the fact that it had been quite some time since a singer had come into the studio that I didn't know how to help. I would listen to whatever their issues were and help solve them. And I went back and counted the number of voice lessons that I had taught and realized it was right about the time that I hit the 10,000 hour mark that I just knew what to do. Part of that is because I study, part of it is because I listened and I was paying attention. Someone complimented me on being a good teacher. Thanks for helping me, Marianne. You're really a very good teacher. And I said, well, I've been doing this for about 10,000 hours now. And I decided that if I hadn't become a fairly good teacher, that it was because I was either not very smart or I wasn't paying attention. So there is something to be said for that number. Now, if you're just sitting in a chair for 10,000 hours and playing the same scales over and over again and not paying attention, you're not going to become good. There has to be some effort that goes into it on your part. But I hit just last week 55,000 voice lessons, which is a lot of lessons.
I've always been really in awe of yours and Dean's work ethic and how many lessons a week you teach, because
Yes.
over the same 30-year career, if you're teaching 50 hours of lessons a week, like I think sometimes you have, versus my 22 hours a week, that if I do more, I just fall into a pit of despair. Like, it really starts adding up at some point. And there's a level of overwork that's also interesting, but that's again, like, y'all have a different predisposition for being able to do that kind of stuff in an extended way. But it's really interesting how that adds up over time. Did you notice after your 10,000 hours, like at 20,000, did you feel doubly as good or as experienced or anything?
The caliber of students that I was working with became higher and higher and higher and just kept demanding more of me. So along the way, I started working with a lot of professional performers. And the way that transpired was that I was working with a couple who had vocal problems. I sent them to a local voice clinic, to an otolaryngologist, and asked if I could come in and watch their stroboscopies and educate myself. And that became a very long relationship that still holds. The physicians were so intrigued by the fact that I was willing, without being paid by the student, to come in and watch the stroboscopies and figure out and have conversations with them. And boy, I did my homework before those. I will not ask a physician something that I should have been able to study on my own and figure out. That relationship resulted in them beginning to send me singers who needed help. And in the beginning, they were amateur singers, and then they were professional singers. And now I work with some pretty high level performers as a result of referrals from that particular practice. Along the way, I've met and been privileged to be in the office for some procedures with other otolaryngologists who are pretty much in the Denver area where I live. And those relationships have really resulted in my studio growing and becoming stronger financially, and also in the experience level of the singers who are coming in the door. So now when I refer a student to that practice or they refer someone to me, I'm always in the office when they're seen. So meaning I'm always in the physician's office when they're seen, and the physician's office actually works around my schedule. So we book those appointments for early in the morning before I am teaching. They know I need to walk out of their door by 11:15. I don't charge the students for that time. because this is about my education. And the thing that it does for me that I have pretty good visual memory. So when a student walks in the door for a session, my brain immediately flips over to what was on their last stroboscopy. And that is incredibly helpful for me. I don't consider myself a scientist in any way, shape, or form, but just the ability to recall that and immediately go, okay, that vocal fold, that vocal cord was a little weak on the left side. Let's work that today.
Well, you know what they say. We all have photographic memory. It's just some of us don't have any film.
That's good. I have lots of film. I've never heard that. I love it.
I actually have quite a bit of film too. I'm a very visual learner.
I'm on the complete opposite side of it. Like sometimes I think that I have the inability to imagine visually, which is kind of tough, especially when I'm asking my students to imagine this and imagine that or whatever. But whenever people talk about rotating a rotisserie chicken in their head or something, it's just blank. It's just totally blank. I can imagine sound at like a really, really high level, but visual stuff, it's just not there.
That's really interesting. One of the things that I learned when I was directing shows is that if I heard the music from the show and did not get a vision immediately, it wasn't my show. And I had to learn that the hard way. And boy, was that one rough show to get through.
Yeah.
This has been amazing. I feel like we could keep going forever, but we're going to have you on another time.
You're an inspiration to us, Marianne. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We just love you. We think you're amazing. We're so glad that we get to even just know you. I had no idea that there was this amazing person out there, and all I knew of you at the beginning of IVTOM was like, oh, she likes musical theater. I like musical theater. Maybe I'll see if I can meet with her for a minute. You're just so generous and kind with your time. And we just appreciate all that you do, not just for your example as a teacher and entrepreneur, but also all that you give to IVTOM, because it's not like you get paid to be the president. It's all volunteer. And it's pretty incredible that you would do that to help so many teachers. So thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IVTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IVTOM at ivtom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to
Ah,
the Voice Teacher Podcast.